Castles might seem majestic in paintings and films, but living inside one during the Middle Ages was often far from glamorous. In fact, for all their towering stone walls and regal banners, medieval castles were notoriously cold. Even with a roaring fire in the Great Hall, the chills seeped into the bones of everyone who lived there. The truth is, castles were not designed for comfort. They were built for defense, power, and intimidation. Warmth was a distant concern, one that even kings and queens had to wrestle with. The Great Hall, the heart of the castle's social life, was the one place where some semblance of warmth could be found. Here, lords held feasts, listened to minstrels, hosted guests, and conducted their daily business. The fire in the great hearth roared throughout the day, casting flickers of orange light across stone walls and high-timbered ceilings. Yet even this mighty blaze had its limits. The heat it generated did not travel far. No, sitting close to the hearth might have been toasty, but everyone else sat wrapped in cloaks, huddling together for body warmth. The higher up the hall, the colder it got. Cold air sunk low, and drafts slipped through gaps in the walls and windows, making warmth a constant struggle. The very construction of a castle worked against comfort. Walls were built of thick stone, ideal for withstanding siege engines and arrows, but terrible for trapping heat. Stone, for all its strength, holds cold like a sponge holds water. Touching a castle wall in winter was like pressing your hand against ice. The floors were often bare or laid with rushes, which might be replaced occasionally, but usually just accumulated grime and added little insulation. Windows were narrow, designed more for archers than for sunshine. When glass was available, it was expensive and small. More often, windows were covered with oiled cloth or shutters that helped keep out wind, but trapped very little warmth. Heating methods, while inventive for their time, were primitive by today's standards. Fireplaces were built into rooms, but many of the smaller chambers had no chimneys. It's only holes in the ceiling to allow smoke to escape. The smoke often lingered, filling rooms with a thick, acrid haze. Even when chimneys were introduced, they were inefficient, sending much of the heat straight up and out, rather than radiating it into the room. Braziers, metal bowls filled with burning charcoal, were sometimes used to warm bedrooms, but these were dangerous. They emitted toxic fumes and posed a fire hazard in an age where fire safety was practically non-existent. People adapted in whatever ways they could. Clothing was layered and heavy, made from wool, fur, and linen. People often slept in their clothes or wrapped themselves in cloaks and blankets made of animal hides. Bed curtains were drawn tightly shut to trap body heat, creating a small bubble of warmth around the sleeper. Servants sometimes warmed stones in the hearth and placed them under bedding to chase away the chill. Though this only lasted a short while. Even food and drink were consumed warm when possible, not just for taste but for survival. A warm meal meant comfort. A hot cup of ale or broth might be the only relief from a day of biting cold. Interestingly, not all parts of the castle were equally freezing. Kitchens, for example, tended to be much warmer. The constant fire, boiling pots, and hot ovens created a sweltering environment, especially compared to the rest of the castle. It was not uncommon for kitchen workers to strip down to lighter garments even in the dead of winter. In contrast, castle chapels and storage areas were often the coldest. These places had no fires and little reason to be kept warm. Priests offered sermons to shivering congregants, and storerooms preserved meat in the natural refrigeration of winter stone. The nobility tried to stay warm with whatever wealth allowed. Tapestries hung on walls to block drafts and create a layer of insulation. Floors might be covered with thick carpets in the wealthiest homes. Feather mattresses and multiple layers of bedding were a privilege, not a standard. Still, even royalty complained of the cold. In written accounts from the period, noblemen and women regularly mentioned numb fingers, frosty breath indoors, and the difficulty of conducting business when everyone was half frozen. Imagine trying to sign a treaty or hold court while your ink congealed in its pot and your scribe's hands trembled with cold. The cold also shaped behavior. People rose with the sun and went to bed not long after nightfall, partly to conserve firewood and candles. Rooms were used sparingly, with entire wings of castles closed off during winter months to save on heating. Servants and retainers slept close to each other, even in stairwells or near the kitchen, wherever a bit of warmth could be stolen. Bathing, already a rare luxury, became even rarer during winter. Heating enough water for a bath required enormous effort, and few were willing to undress in icy rooms for the sake of hygiene. The Great Hall remained the hub of warmth, simply because it had the largest fire and gathered the most people. When dozens or even hundreds crammed into one space, their body heat helped lift the temperature slightly. Feasts, ceremonies, and public gatherings all created rare moments of warmth. But these events were fleeting. Once the crowd dispersed, the cold crept back in. This is why those great roaring fires never truly went out. Wood was constantly being fed into the hearths, and servants worked day and night to maintain them. The smoke curling out of the chimneys was a sign of life, of heat, and of defiance against the long, merciless winter. But even the Great Hall had its flaws. High ceilings let warm air escape upward. Tall windows, even with shutters, were drafty. And the sheer size of the space made it hard to heat. One massive fire was no match for an enormous stone room with 30-foot ceilings. As night fell and fires burned low, the warmth dwindled. Guests and lords would retreat to their chambers wrapped in layers, and silence would settle over the hall like frost. It's easy to forget that in those times, warmth was not a given. It was something fought for daily. People of all ranks endured long, bone-chilling winters, and the castle itself offered no real sanctuary from the cold. It might protect from arrows and invaders, but it could not shield from icy winds or frigid stone. In many ways, living in a castle during medieval times meant learning to live with discomfort. Cold hands, stiff joints, and shivering sleep were part of daily life, no matter how many titles a person carried. Yet there was a certain resilience in how people coped. The cold was a fact of life, not a crisis. People gathered, adapted, and endured. They learned the warmest corners of their homes, the best times to cook or gather, the thickest cloaks to wear, and the people who shared warmth best. In the face of bitter winters and freezing nights, the medieval world kept moving. The cold was ever present, but life carried on around the firelight, within the flickering shadows of the Great Hall. The next time you imagine medieval life within the stone walls of a castle, try not to picture grand comfort or cozy firesides. Instead, think of the breath turning to mist indoors, of servants with frostbitten fingers hauling logs, of lords wrapped in velvet and fur still rubbing their hands over the flames. Think of warmth as a rare commodity, fought for and cherished, not easily given. In the great halls of history, heat was never guaranteed. It was earned one fire, one cloak, and one stubborn heart at a time. So now you know, even the grandest castles with their towering walls and mighty hearths were far from cozy. The great hall might have glowed with firelight and echoed with laughter, but the warmth never spread far. Beyond the flickering flames, stone walls breathed cold into every room, and drafty corridors sent chills down every spine. Life in a medieval castle meant enduring long, freezing winters wrapped in wool and huddled close to whoever was nearest. Even kings and queens weren't spared the bite of winter's breath. If this glimpse into the frosty reality of castle life gave you a new perspective, go ahead and give the video a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe for more history that pulls back the curtain on what life was really like in the past. And if you've ever sat in a cold room and thought you had it bad, just remember at least you don't have to sleep in your cloak next to a smoky fire with frozen ink and icy stone floors beneath your feet. Thanks for watching, and stay warm out there. We'll see you in the next one, with more untold stories from history's cold and fascinating corners.